Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here on this glorious Edmonton winter day, standing in front of the legislature, standing in front of that beautiful river valley that reminds us of the permanence of human settlement on this land, of the thousands of years that the people of Treaty 6 and later the Métis people have been here on this land. Well, that was something. The last 6 weeks have been a wild ride, from a government pushed into the corner, a government worried about its own political future, a government that lashes out at every criticism, that subverts democracy, that subverts our institutions, that pushes 14 bills, not one of which address the real concerns of Albertans, from cost of living to real change on healthcare to public education. So let me just say on behalf of all Albertans, what the heck was that? This is not a government any Albertan elected. They are doing things that no Albertan wants in this crazy wild time. 3 overnight sittings until 2:30 in the morning. Unprecedented use of the notwithstanding clause preemptively for the first time in Alberta history. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. Here's a thing for the political nerds out there, but it matters. In the history of Alberta, 120-year history of this legislature, we have seen the time allocation, or what some people call closure use. That's how you shut down debate, just over 100 times. This government has used it 84 times since 2019. The UCP has used closure to shut down debate and ram through their bills 54% of the time that it's been used in Alberta's history. 13% of the time, nearly 10% of the time that it's been used in Alberta's entire history in the last 5 weeks. That tells you who this government is. We went into this fall session with a clear focus on what Albertans care about: the cost of living, healthcare, public education, good jobs, and a trustworthy government. And the UCP focused on none of those things. With their make-it-up-as-you-go-along bills, they introduced massive changes to Alberta that nobody has asked for. They refused to focus on what really matters, and it became clear now more than ever because the mask fell. It became very clear that this government cares only about its own political survival, and Albertans be damned. Over the last 6 weeks, they've shown Albertans just how out of touch they are, just how self-serving they are, and quite frankly, just how cruel they are when they think it suits them politically. This is my very first session. What a way to start. My first day of work in the session. I had to give an hour-long speech about the unprecedented attack on human rights and on workers' rights. I feel like being self-indulgent for a moment here. I like to talk in public. It's a thing I do. But the number of times I've had to stand up in the legislature to explain to the government what their own legislation does, or to explain to ministers why what they're doing is unprecedented and wrong, is certainly not what I was expecting to do. And it reinforced just how crucial it is that we fight for our democratic institutions, that we fight for checks and balances, that we fight for separation of power, and most important, just how much Albertans deserve a new government. I have a lot more to say, but we don't want to be here forever. So I'm going to turn it over to my deputy leader, my incredible colleague, Raki Pancholi. And just before I do that, I'll say that I'm thrilled to be joined here by some bleary-eyed colleagues. They've been working very hard all session, and particularly for the last weeks, and I'm really happy to have with us the MLA for Edmonton Meadows and our Shadow Minister of Infrastructure, Jasvir Deo. See who's next to him. The incredible MLA for Edmonton Rutherford, our Shadow Minister of Forestry and Parks, Jody Callahoo-Stonehouse. The 928th member, did I get that right, of the legislature, our newest member, the MLA for Edmonton Ellerslie, my special advisor on small business, Gurtej Singh Brar. The chilled out AOC, is that what I'm supposed to call you now? The MLA for Calgary Beddington, our Shadow Minister for Multiculturalism, Calgary Klein, I always do that. Our Shadow Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism, Lizette Tejada, and of course, our Shadow Minister of Finance, the MLA for Calgary Foothills, Cord Ellingson. So over to you, Raki.
Thanks, Nahed. So it has really been a wild ride this fall. In the over 6 years that I've been in MLA, I've seen the UCP do a lot of damage, but never in so short of a time. And the personal impact of government's choices in the past 2 months on so many Albertans is unprecedented. There is not a person in this province who has not been affected by the government's choices. And I share Nahed's comments, which echoes what I hear from Albertans daily. What is this government doing? So as we do a recap of the fall sitting, let's review what the UCP actually did, shall we? I'm gonna have to warn you, buckle up. The government forced 51,000 striking teachers back to work under a contract that 91% of teachers rejected. They did this by using the notwithstanding clause, stripping away the rights of every Alberta teacher and rammed it through the legislature in one day by limiting the amount of time that MLAs could debate it. Oh, and the Premier didn't even show up to defend it or to vote on it. No, she flew off to the Middle East and left her education minister to defend it, which is maybe no surprise why he's now the first UCP MLA to face recall. The Premier and the UCP put teachers and students back into the same crowded classrooms with no improvements and only the weakest promises that one day they might help public education. Oh yeah, and still the lowest education funding per student in Canada. The government then took away the rights of even more Albertans by using the notwithstanding clause 3 more times against trans youth, women and girls, medical professionals, and parents. While actively dismantling AHS and our public healthcare system over the past 2 years, the UCP then officially established American-style 2-tier private healthcare in Alberta. It won't mean better healthcare for Albertans, and it won't mean more Alberta healthcare workers. It just means those who can afford it will get care before those who can't. We're not done. The government cut financial supports for people with disabilities by forcing a switch from the AISH program to their new program, ADAP. This reduces the monthly income of Albertans with severe disabilities even more. After inviting newcomers to Alberta for years, the UCP is putting citizenship markers on driver's license, which has no purpose other than to stigmatize immigrants and lay the groundwork for cutting people's access to provincial services. It's divisive and, frankly, un-Canadian. The UCP gave 9 of their own parliamentary secretaries a raise while voting down a minimum wage increase that could have helped 114,000 Alberta workers. The Minister of Justice gave himself immunity from any professional discipline. The top lawyer in the province now has the lowest professional standards of any lawyer in Alberta. The UCP changed the rules mid-game on citizen initiative petitions and referendum questions to appease their separatist supporters. They denied adequate funding to Elections Alberta just to do the work that they're required to do on recall and citizen initiatives, the laws created by the UCP themselves. They regularly use time allocation, basically cutting off debate in the legislature to ram through some of the most controversial bills. And that's just what happened within the legislature. Let's not forget, September started with a poorly thought-out book ban that the UCP had to then reverse. Thanks to a reckless and dangerous aversion to public health measures by this government, Canada lost its measles-free status, and Alberta recorded its first measles death in a generation. The UCP announced Alberta will opt out of the federal dental care program that will impact thousands of Albertans. Let's keep going. The UCP's tacit support for separatism was soundly rejected by almost 500,000 Albertans who signed the Forever Canada petition confirming that Albertans are indeed proud Canadians. The Auditor General report on Dynalife identified $125 million public dollars wasted on failed lab privatization efforts and that the UCP went ahead with it against the advice of AHS. This same report also shared that records were destroyed and that AHS staff feared repercussions for speaking out. The government then essentially announced plans to fire the Auditor General this coming spring, just as the AG is expected to finish his investigation into corrupt care. And speaking of corrupt care, Judge Wyant released his report into healthcare corruption allegations. Remember MH Care, Turkish Tylenol, and all the others? Well, it found that there absolutely were breaches of AHS procurement policy, confirming what AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos was fired by the UCP for investigating. And then we found out that the individual at the heart of that, Jitendra Prasad, had met several times with Danielle Smith before she became Premier. But on the question of whether there was any political interference in these shady contracts, well, Judge Wyant said himself he couldn't say because of the limitations that the UCP placed on controlling what evidence he could see. Oh, and not one UCP minister or political staff was actually interviewed by him, proving once again that Albertans need a full public inquiry into corrupt care now. This session, it has become clear that this government is running scared. They are scared of opposition. They are scared of political competition. They are scared of being questioned or challenged. They are scared of Albertans. And so we've seen incredible overreach by the government into all areas of Albertans' lives, into all aspects of civil society and the judicial system, into the homes, doctors' offices, businesses, workplaces of Albertans, and into the very democratic processes of this province. This is a government that thinks it knows best and wants the final word on everything, but instead has demonstrated just how out of touch they are with the priorities of Albertans. And while I have listed off an incredible line of damaging actions by this government, I hope Albertans watching don't lose hope, because Alberta's New Democrats have stayed laser-focused on the issues that matter to you. So I'd like to turn it now back to Naheed to review what we brought to the legislature this fall.
Well, thanks, Raki. And we've also had a busy fall, not just standing up for Albertans in opposition to government legislation, but also bringing in a lot of things laser-focused on what Albertans are telling us they're concerned about, really asking Albertans to ask yourself a simple question. Are things better now than they were 6 years ago when the UCP took power? Are things better now for you, for your kids, for your family, than they were when Danielle Smith became the Premier 3 long years ago? Has your life become more affordable? It's easier to get a doctor's appointment. Are you living without pain that you had before? Do you feel safer on your streets? Do you feel like your cities and your towns are getting the infrastructure they need for things like roads and transit and rec centers? There's not an Albertan who would say life is better than it was 6 years ago. And that is to be laid at the feet of this government. Though they try to blame everyone they can for all their failures, though the Premier, despite being asked over and over again, refuses to apologize for any mistakes and finds someone else to blame. Life has not gotten better. Out of touch here is an understatement. Raki just gave you a huge long list of all the things they did, not one of which was asked for by any Albertan. But I'm proud of our caucus. We stand up every single day for all Albertans. So I wanted to share a recap of some of the other things we were doing that perhaps got a little less press, but one that I hope reflects a bit of optimism about what Alberta can be and what government can do for Albertans. So for example, we introduced as our first private members bill, Bill 201 to protect your paychecks. Bill 201, which was arrived at after extensive consultation with business and minimum wage owners, put in a gradual, thoughtful increase to the minimum wage to get us away from being the lowest minimum wage and the highest youth unemployment jurisdiction in the country. And also, just this morning, the little terminal asked me how much I wanted to tip. And what most Albertans don't realize is when you press those little buttons on the terminal, that tip doesn't always go to your server. So we put in common sense proposal to simply protect tips so that the one who does the work gets the tip. The UCP turned it all down. We introduced Bill 202 to strengthen accountability and trust in government, especially around gifts and lobbyists and ethics rules, to end the corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse that we've seen so much with this government. They turned it down. We put in Bill 203, something that the UCP said they believed in, making energy more affordable for Albertans and preparing us for a future for Albertans of affordable clean energy. They turned it down. Remember what got me back into politics? A cold day like today, when Alberta's energy grid very nearly collapsed because of UCP incompetence and mismanagement. We gave them a common sense proposal, a non-ideological proposal that would have helped utilities and consumers. They turned it down. Bill 204, we brought in to protect healthcare whistleblowers, because with all the chaos in the healthcare system, with people's email addresses and who they report to changing on the daily, healthcare workers are no longer protected if they want to bring forward things that are wrong, waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. We put in a simple thing saying they should have protections that other workers in Alberta have. The UCP turned it down. We introduced motions to denounce separatism. The UCP refused to talk about it. We put in a motion to stop skyrocketing auto insurance increases. The UCP said no. We called for a public inquiry on rising grocery prices, and particularly common sense, thoughtful ways that we can combat shrinkflation, something that everyone is seeing as they go shopping for their nuts and bolts recipe for Christmas. The UCP said no. We proposed significant amendments to government acts, to the Water Act to safeguard clean water. I happen to have one of Alberta's experts on water sitting right behind me, but they don't care. They said no. Changes to the Utilities Act to make utilities more affordable, they said no. To stop attacks on Albertans with disabilities and stop the ill-thought-out changes to the Alberta Assurance Income for the Severely Handicapped, they said no. To the Police Act, to make sure that the Cabinet, the Premier and the Minister of Public Safety would not interfere with police and tell police who they should go after. They said no. They said no to every single one of those things. But those are the things we are fighting for. These are the priorities we know Albertans want to see from their government. Look, I know this has been a tough year for all Albertans, and particularly for those who follow politics. Maybe I can just highlight one thing on the big, big, long list that Raki put forward. The very last bill the UCP put forth sounded very arcane. It was called the Justice Statutes Amendment Act, right? Did I get that right? Bill 14. Bill 14 started the process of dismantling democracy in Alberta. I shouldn't say started, continued the process. Because their very last bill that was passed well after midnight in the last sitting of this legislature also dismantled democracy. And the reason I want to highlight this one is not because I think people are really fired up about the UCP dismantling democracy, but it really shows you how shameless they've become. What we've heard from Raki is a series of things that, well, frankly, are shady as hell. And the fact that this government is willing to do things that are shady as hell and not even pretend they're not doing it tells Albertans all they need to know about the attitude of this government. The minister bragged at the UCP convention that they changed election laws to make it better for Conservatives and harder for everyone else. He stood up in the House where in any other profession or any other government, the act that he did will probably be considered at the very least a firing offense and probably illegal. He stood up and introduced an act in the House to give himself immunity from consequences for what he does. How do you do that? How do you have the gall to stand up and do that? Every day he stood up in the House and he defended Sam Marash, who he only disclosed years later is his best friend, his travel buddy, the guy he goes to hockey games with, and his relative. And yet he stands up to defend Sam Marash. How do you do that? Everything about this government shows their utter contempt and disregard for the rule of law, for the norms of how people communicate and talk in a society, and mostly their contempt for Albertans. The other thing they did in Bill 14 is they banned any other party from using the word conservative in their party name. It's almost comical, the extent to which they will go to protect themselves. But let's be clear, there is nothing conservative about Danielle Smith's government. They're not fiscally conservative. The government is full of waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, and corruption. They're not institutionally conservative. Conservatives are supposed to believe in things like the Constitution and the role of the courts and separation of powers. They're not that. They're not libertarians. They strip away human rights from people every chance they get. And they're only socially conservative when it suits their political power processes. This is an extremist government. This is not the government that Albertans thought they were voting for in the closest election in Alberta's history in May 2023. This is a political movement concerned only with power. So going forward in 2026, Albertans can expect Alberta's New Democrats to keep pushing on what matters. Your cost of living, making sure the healthcare system is there when you need it, making sure your kids have access to the best public education in the world, making sure that we are creating jobs in Alberta, not just seasonal Christmas jobs that the Premier brags about, but real sustainable jobs for you, for your kids, and for your grandkids. And especially this year, making sure you have a government you can be proud of, a government that tells you the truth, a government that is honest, that is ethical, and above all, is competent. And we'll never stop fighting for you, and we will never stop fighting for Albertans. Happy to take questions.
All right, everyone, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to start with questions in the room. If you've joined us on Zoom, all you have to do is raise your hand, and we'll get to you as well. We're going to start with Cindy Tran from the Edmonton Journal.
Hi, happy end of sitting. I wanted to ask about what we saw happening in the House this past sitting. So we saw time allocation, hours of debate despite such, but also I just wanted to ask about what your thoughts are on the dynamics of debate and decorum within the House this sitting compared to previous.
Well, this is my first sitting, Cindy, so I can't compare it too much to previous, but I will tell you that I've been pretty shocked by the UCP's callous disregard and contempt for everyone who criticizes them, including the opposition. You know, the opposition House Leader is, shall we say, a pretty big boy with a very thin skin. And the fact that they've got the hypocrisy and the gall to stand up and say, we are offended, we are hurt, while using those opportunities to insult and berate my caucus members, particularly the ones they think they can poke at. So I've got right here with me on stage probably the three biggest victims of the UCP's anger. They're all women. They're all strong, powerful, brilliant women. Two of them are women of color. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on what they think about all of that. Two of them are women of color, and one is an Indigenous woman of color. Thank you. I missed the last half of my sentence, didn't I? It's late, folks. It's late. But in any case, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about that. But I've been pretty disgusted by that kind of behavior, and particularly by, this is very, very in the weeds. But you know, if you raise a point of order in the legislature, it's supposed to be a rule was breached on this issue at 2:05 p.m. And every single time the government House Leader uses it to insult and put drive-by smears against our caucus members. But we wouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised by that. And that simply is because this is who they are. So we've seen Angela Pitt basically suggest that a principal should be fired because he dared to oppose her as his MLA. We've seen R.J. Sigurdsson, the Minister of Agriculture, basically release personal information about one of his neighbors who's not even the organizer of the recall petition against him to expose her to harassment and anger. We've seen this over and over and over again from this government. So given that they are cornered, given that they're angry, given that they're lashing out, given that they don't know how to deal with criticism, it's unsurprising how badly they treat the institutions of the House.
For my follow-up, today Minister Scow was speaking to reporters, and he said that he's proud of the work that his government has done, and he is also not distracted by what's happening outside of the House, so things like recall and separation. I'm wondering what you make of that, because you are saying that, oh, this government is running scared.
Yeah, you know, that is a great example of reading between the lines. The fact that he felt the need to say that, which is something you would normally never say. What a strange thing to say. I'm not distracted by what Albertans think. I'm focused on what's going on in this building. It's a bizarre thing to say. And the fact that he felt the need to say it shows that, in fact, the opposite is true. They are running scared.
Connor Hogg from CTV Edmonton.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I'm curious to get your opinion on the things that the government championed for Albertans this weekend. Do you agree that they're prioritizing the areas where people are most concerned?
No, they're absolutely not. Of those 14 bills that we had before the House, not one of them was about the economy. Not one of them was about cost of living. The ones that were about healthcare demonized a couple of dozen trans kids and privatized the system, something that they explicitly promised not to do when they ran for elections. So it's very, very clear that this is a government that's desperately trying to regain its popularity. They're going back to the old culture wars that are completely exhausted now in the hopes that that will help, trying to ban books, talking endlessly about children's genitals. getting back to trans conversations, even though their bill wasn't actually about those things, it was about the Constitution and using the notwithstanding clause. It's extremely clear that they're using the institutions of the legislature and the law and their slim parliamentary majority to pass things that benefit them, and they hope will get Albertans angry and riled up and thinking that Danielle Smith is their savior, and it's not working.
That actually kind of ties into my follow-up. The list of accomplishments so far this session that Joseph Scow gave about an hour ago, it included things like bills that deal with federal overreach into provincial jurisdiction, the firearms legislation, the ability for doctors to be able to work in both the public and private sectors of healthcare. How would a NDP government, prioritize things differently?
I think when you look at our record this legislative session, you'll see what a New Democrat government would look like. A government that is thoughtful, that is pragmatic, that is focused on what is important to Albertans, that talks to experts, that talks to everyday people to try and come up with solutions, that doesn't make it up as you go along, only for political interest. So the things that the government is proud of are things that no Albertan has asked for. They're not things that are top of mind of Albertans. We knocked on over 200,000 doors this summer. We had thousands of Albertans from Grand Prairie to Lethbridge come out to spend time with us at community gatherings at which we did not threaten to spank a single citizen. But what we heard from those citizens is that all those things that the government is proud of is nothing on their list, and in some cases, particularly on public health care, is the opposite of what they've asked for. Two-tier health care will increase wait times for people in the public system. We know this. The evidence is very clear, and that is exactly the opposite of what Albertans need.
Morgan Black, Global.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the AISH/ADAP changes. Sure. What further consultation would you like to have seen, and do you think there's a world where ADAP makes sense?
Yeah.
And if not, why?
And if any of my colleagues want to jump in on this one, because you've had a long history with this, I'm happy to take it, but I'll start. And so here is the challenge, which is no consultation has been done on AISH. So the situation we now have is Albertans who are living with disabilities, among the most economically vulnerable Albertans, are systematically getting money taken away. So first of all, they're getting the $200 federal disability benefit, just $200 a month. It doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're making $1,900 a month, that extra $200 is maybe you get to go to a movie once in a while. Maybe you get to go to the till at the grocery store and not be scared about whether the amount that you have in your cart is going to be too much for you this month. And the Alberta government, uniquely in Canada, is taking that money back. Then, we haven't talked a lot about this aspect of it, but AISH recipients who are living in subsidized housing are seeing massive increases to their rents, hundreds and hundreds of dollars as a result of government policy. And a lot of them are very scared they won't be able to afford to live in those places anymore. They'll have to come out on the street. And then you have the ADAP program. The government's stated goals for the ADAP program are actually pretty noble. Let's make it easier for people with disabilities who are able to and willing to work without losing their benefits. Who could argue with that? But the design of the program does exactly the opposite. What it does is it forces everyone on AISH, presupposes every one of them is willing, able, and ready to work. But it provides no supports to get people into those jobs. There's no assistance in building inclusive workplaces where people with disabilities can work productively and happily. And we've got the highest youth unemployment rates almost in our history. So there's no jobs. And instead, we're making people jump through these bureaucratic hoops to prove they're disabled, to prove they can't work, spending hundreds of dollars each time on medical assessments in a system that, even though it may sound like it's well-intentioned, is exceptionally cruel. And if the government had done even the barest bit of consultation, they would have figured out this wasn't going to work.
Catherine Gurkowski, All Alberta.
So there's a lot that happened, as Raki had mentioned, the attack on courts, the way they interacted with independent offices of the legislature, use of the notwithstanding clause, and there's some legitimate tools like time allocation or omnibus bills that were used perhaps in unusual ways. And I'm wondering, what, if anything, are you going to do to talk about the overall impact of democracy going forward to how the House is operating? When people are kind of caring about the cost of groceries and maybe don't have time to look at legislative offices.
Yeah. So I stood up in the House yesterday, and just before I stood up in the House, I sent a note to my House leader saying, you have me slotted down for 15 minutes. I won't even take 10, don't worry. And I was wrong. I ended up speaking for well over 20 minutes, and I encourage folks to take a look at that because I think I really laid this out, but I'll try and summarize. It's so cynical because here's what the UCP government believes. They believe that for most people who are not political nerds, who are working hard to put food on the table, attacks on democracy are no big deal. I believe they're a big deal. I believe that faith in the institutions that build our community is something that is important and something that matters. And so what we've seen here is consistent attacks on democracy, and I'll tell you why that's a problem. It's not a problem because when you think of democracy, you think of I go to vote every 4 years and I stand in line and it's not that big a deal and my vote doesn't really matter and I'd rather have more money on my paycheck at the end of the day, which of course the Conservatives also have not delivered. It's much more fundamental than that. So the Conservatives have a simple philosophy that if they can keep a base of their electorate angry all the time, untrusting all the time, that they can only trust Danielle Smith. You can't trust judges. You can't trust institutions. You can't trust teachers. You can't trust schools. You can't trust doctors. This is all a coherent philosophy to make people undermine the institutions that the UCP is doing such a bad job with. It's very cynical. It makes me pretty angry. But it's very, very, very calculated. But here's the problem. Danielle Smith will take lines from the Trump playbook and she will rail against unelected judges, judges appointed by Trudeau. She will rail against independent officers of the legislature. She insulted and demeaned the chief electoral officer, someone who her government hired. She always insults AHS despite the fact that she herself has handpicked without any search 4 CEOs of AHS, fired 3 of them, the 4th one's on indefinite leave. She appointed her own board of AHS, and when they said, you're doing this wrong, there's something shady going on here, she fired the board. But here's the issue. What is she going to do about that? Is she going to have us elect judges like in the United States? She has the power to do that for provincial judges. She's not going to do it. She's not interested in solving these problems. She's interested in making people angry. But the thing about that kind of anger is it eventually burns you. Ask Jason Kenney what happened when you got your base super mad and said you can trust only me. At some point, they stopped trusting you. And of course, you know, the Premier got booed at her own convention, which is a great example of like not learning from history. Because she said you can trust only me, and then she did a thing they thought was untrustworthy, and they booed her. So where does this lead for everyday Albertans? It's not about what happens in the Dome. It's not about us standing up in the legislature. It's about fundamentally pitting neighbor against neighbor. It's about having the largest measles outbreak in North America and a kid dying of measles because people don't trust doctors, scientists, and vaccines because the government tells them not to. How do you put that genie back in the bottle? The Premier is playing an unbelievably dangerous game here, only for political gain. It's not because she doesn't believe in these institutions. It's not because she doesn't believe in the Constitution. It's because she's playing a game entirely for political gain. And Albertans are mad about it. Unprecedented recall petitions, 500,000 people signing a petition against her stance on separatism. They like to say, oh, the unions are organizing this, the NDP is organizing this. I wish we had the time to organize stuff like that. We're busy dealing with what's going on in the legislature. These are everyday Albertans getting unbelievably angry with this government, and they don't know how to manage it. And so in terms of doing it, they're burning it down on the way out the door. They're burning down trust in institutions. They're burning down the institutions, and Albertans deserve so much better. Albertans are crying for a government that is competent, a government that is ethical, a government that is compassionate, and an Alberta that dreams big and big things can happen. And the good news for Albertans is, guess what? You don't have to stand for this. You don't have to stand for this government. You have a better choice. And our job as Alberta's New Democrats is to be that better choice.
And on a different topic, and I know they were just released, but the Auditor General.
I haven't read them yet.
Okay, you haven't read them yet.
You can try.
I'll try. There was a recommendation to designate flood hazard areas and complete floodway development regulation. Government basically says they're not going to do that. They didn't give justification for why they thought what they're doing now is working or not working. They blocked information. And so I'm wondering, since you're someone who has, as a politician, experience
Between you and me,
like,
Catherine, I was really hoping if you would ask about the Auditor General reports, you would ask about that one.
Well, yeah, because you have experience, I'm wondering, like, what is at stake when it comes to flood zones and.
I can talk about this both specifically and generally. So, having been through flooding in southern Alberta, what we know is that there need to be significant policy changes, because when the flood happened in 2013, the provincial government was caught flat-footed. And so what we need to do is make real significant policy changes in the area that I call resilience. And that means you've got to designate flood hazard areas, you've got to figure out how you shift building codes within those areas, or if you allow building in those areas at all. And you have to make significant investments in resilience infrastructure, like upstream water mitigation, for example, on the Bow and Elbow rivers, upstream of the city of Calgary. The problem with all of this is it's expensive. It runs up against real entrenched interests. So, you know, if you are someone who has built your home in a flood hazard area, you don't want the government to come in and say no one else can build there, or the nature of your neighborhood has changed. So these things are expensive and they're very, very hard. And the thing that makes it hard for government to deal with things like this is that you may never need it. And so when you're building the Springbank Dry Dam west of Calgary, $500 million, you're praying it will never, ever be used, because you'll never have a flood that way. And so for government, it's really, really hard to think long-term and to think about these investments and justify them. In this particular government that I've often said has very little interest in governing, there's no political win in it. There's no ideological win in it. It's just the right thing to do. And what we're seeing continuously across government, and the Auditor General reports show this all the time, is that this government is neglecting its core responsibilities in favor of ideological points. And one of these core responsibilities is fix the infrastructure, create resilience, make sure people are ready for wild weather events that are becoming more and more common. And we're just not seeing any of that from this government. And when the next flood comes, and it will someday, we will be woefully unprepared, just like we were the last time.
We have time for one more question, and we're going to go to Zoom. Sean Amato from City News. Sean, go ahead.
And then I'll loop around. So a new report says 59% of Albertans want the government to remove public funding for private schools. Where does the NDP stand on this issue?
Well, you know, this is another one of those citizen initiatives, and unlike the UCP, we believe in citizens running citizen initiatives and not putting our thumb on the scale on these things. But our point has always been very clear. I believe in Peter Lougheed's dream. I believe that we need the best public education system in the world. We need the best funded public education system that creates incredible outcomes for students. Right now we have the lowest funding per student anywhere in Canada. And it's very clear that the Conservative government has done this on purpose. They want to underfund public education so that they can build out these alternative and independent and charter systems. And, you know, let's not forget that the UCP has given 2 school charters to 2 former UCP candidates in Calgary. So what we believe in is an education system, a public education system that meets the needs of every single student. We also understand that a lot of parents choose different pathways. And a lot of those parents are choosing those different pathways because they feel the public system doesn't work for them. So let's build, rather than demonize them for choosing a different path, let's build a public education system that works for everyone.
Thanks. I don't see Amanda Chapman there, but I wanted to ask, how is she feeling about the recall campaign against her? How do you plan to approach this in the new year
Yeah.
with the potential of more recall campaigns against your folks as well?
Yeah, so let me tell you one thing, which may sound like it's not answering your question, but it really is. We have a wonderful team. We look after each other. And as tough as this session has been with what we're facing on the other side, it should have been much worse for us. And the reason it wasn't much worse is because we've got this incredible team. You know, I remember walking into the legislature late at night a couple of nights ago, and I ran into a UCP cabinet minister, and he said, "Why are you here? Are you speaking?" And I said, "No, I'm not on the roster. I'm not speaking, but my team is working all night. And as their leader, I got to be here." And it's so interesting that the Premier has never made it to a late evening sitting. She wasn't here for Bill 2. She wasn't here all night on Monday. She wasn't here all night on Tuesday. So what does that have to do with your question, Sean? When this happened, our team instinctively rushed to Amanda Chapman to give her big hugs and say, "We love you, Amanda." And Amanda looked at us and said, "This is awesome. I'm going to get more media coverage for the stuff I do as Shadow Minister of Education now." She is very strong. She is very competent. She is exactly the kind of person that we want in public service. A professional, a mother of 3, someone who understands what Albertans really, really care about. She's the best. And, you know, this morning I heard that she was doing an interview on the radio, and my political instinct was, when all these recalls are against the UCP, why are they interviewing the one NDP candidate? And then I went, oh, it's because she wants to talk about education, and she's using this as a reason to do that. So she's great, she's strong, she's amazing, she's brilliant. The people of her riding love her. And we're not going to lash out at the people who are doing this recall petition. We're not going to talk about who they are or whether it's an AstroTurf campaign. We're going to say they've got the right to do what they do. But we now have the ability to talk about Amanda Chapman all the time, and I am thrilled to talk about Amanda Chapman all the time.
And with that, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Mind how you go.
Thank you.